Albert Meltzer started the Kate Sharpley Library, and he did it because he'd met this woman in a pub and she told him her story, and you probably know that in England, or you may not if you don't live in England or you're not part of the European diaspora, in the First World War between 1914 and 1918, if a man was killed in that war, occasionally a nurse or a woman's auxiliary, you were presented with a great big medal that said he died for king and country. And often these medals were presented to family members at ceremonies involving members of the royal family or royalty or nobility. And Kate Sharpley, who'd been part of an anarchist group in South London, threw her medal at some relative of the Queen and said, you know, you can stuff your medal, I don't want it. Now, Kate Sharpley is not an important person in anarchism. She never wrote anything. But for some time, she was part of a movement, a working class movement in South London that has never been documented. That I'm sure read Freedom, the main anarchist paper in England, but did their own activities and lived their own lives. And it was a deliberate part, it was deliberate on Albert's part to call it the Kate Sharpley Library. Because for him, anarchism, anarchy, wasn't just about Kropotkin, or about Proudhon, or about Voltaire de Cleyre, or about Louis Michel. And no one gainsays what they've said or what they've done. But it was about the people who made it, who made it from being an idea to a reality in their lives and how they operated their lives. Some of whom had never read Kropotkin or Louis Michel, and others who had. And I began to realise, and Albert realised it because he was older and cleverer than I was. He realised it way before me. That if you look at what anarchy is and anarchism is in that light, it's completely different from this intellectual progression from Kropotkin to Lacan, you know. It's not that. It was never that for me. And if it was for other people, that's fine. Anarchism was about individual experience, the emotions, the feelings, the challenges, the excitements, the miseries of trying to get a better world. And many people who did that never wrote anything, or they did it with sketchy little thumbnail pieces in magazines and papers that have long gone. It was people who never wrote anything, but people who did things. You know, when Louise Michel spoke, or Emma Goldman spoke, say Emma Goldman comes and speaks in your local city, who put the chairs out then? Who put the tables out? Who made sure that the hall was booked? Wasn't her. You know, that's a fact. Comrades did it to help her and to help the movement. And their names, they're not recorded. And she'll go away, you know. She would go away on the train, and they would carry on with trying to make anarchy. And it seemed that if you looked at those people, then your view of what anarchy was different. So when you ask me what anarchism is, it's everyday life. It's what people do. It's how people transcend, interrogate, or really interrogate, transcend their everyday existence and somehow see a magical change possible. So that's why we do the Kate Sharpley Library, and we print memories of people who are not well known. Yet some of those people were anarchists all their life. And I think as Kropotkin wasn't, you know, Kropotkin by the time 1914 came and he decided to support France and the Allies in World War I, there's nothing anarchist about that, but there were still hundreds and hundreds of men and women in Europe who fought against that war, who were opposed to that war, and went to prison and suffered emotionally and physically. So those stories, I think, if we collect those stories, then questions about who's important is anarchism. I need to put them in a different perspective. We could sit here and talk about Kropotkin and Proudhon all night, but the question is, who read them? And did anyone read them? I mean, did people sit? I mean, there's a marvellous book called Anarchist Voices by Paul Average, where he interviews hundreds of people who were anarchists in America, because it's the country he worked in. When you read their accounts of becoming anarchists, very few said, well, I read Kropotkin, I read Max Stirner, I read Luigi Galliani. They say things like, well, my sister was interested and she used to go to these plays and I went. Or some of my friends got interested and they went to these parties. Or I was at work and the old boy was an anarchist and the next lathe next to mine and he talked to me. It wasn't that I sat down and I read through Proudhon line by line, or Bakunin line by line. It wasn't that, and I think that's something we have to remember.